Welcome to MapleWoodian.com podcast. We have on the phone, and very, very proud to have Amy Goodman. She is the producer of Democracy Now!, author, all-around great journalist and investigator, and one of the real people in the news business who digs up the real stories. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm great, and I'm really looking forward to being there tonight at the high school and to do the Red Path lecture.
Yes, so Amy will be at Columbia High School tonight as part of the South Orange Maplewood Adult School. She will talk about the great work that Democracy Now! Does, and also her latest book, The Silence to Majority, Stories of Uprisings, Occupations, Resistance, and Hope. And to give people the quick background on you, you have basically been doing a lot of great investigative work for many years. I know you had done coverage of East Timor independence. Of course, I'm probably mispronouncing that.
No, you got it right.
East Timor independent movement, Chevron Corporation's corruption and work out of Nigeria. But in more recent years as well, you've done Democracy Now!, which is on many stations and also online. But tell us about the latest book, The Silence to Majority, and the efforts behind that, and what you're talking about in that book, and in your speaking tonight.
Well, you know, Joe, we've been doing Democracy Now! We're just coming up on the 19th anniversary, and we started on like 8 community radio stations like WBAI in New York, 99.5 FM. And now, 19 years later, we're broadcasting on over 1,300 public radio and television stations around the United States and around the world. So we're very excited about that.
And much of that is on the Pacifica network?
Well, there are 5 stations,
right.
But now we're on many PBS stations across the country, public access stations, NPR stations, community stations.
And people can go to democracynow.org for all of that background and where to hear and see the show.
You can watch it, you can listen to it, and the point of Democracy Now! Is a daily, grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour, dealing with the critical news of the day, bringing you, not your know-nothing pundits that you get on the networks, these pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong, but hearing people speak for themselves, who are the experts in their communities. The show today, Michael Brown's parents on from Geneva, talking about how we have to deal with racial discrimination and police brutality, not only because of the death of Mike Brown, August 9th, but because of what's happening in communities all over this country.
Right, and that's the young man in Ferguson, Missouri.
That's right. Democracy Now! Has been out repeatedly to Ferguson, and, right now Governor Nixon has just held a news conference, which definitely sounded Nixonian. He, instead of giving a speech where he says, the indictment or non-indictment is about to come down, the grand jury decision is about to come down, we are all in this together, we have to be a community, talking about feeling the pain and all of that. Instead, he basically issued a threat and said, I've got the National Guard, they've got the weapons, I think it is critical to be there on the ground to show the fear, the anger. It's as if he's inciting rioting. It really was quite amazing to hear. We have had on Democracy Now! Just yesterday General Daniel Bolger, and he's a 3-star general who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, just retired last year after 35 years in the Army. And when I asked him about the militarization of police in this country, not only in Ferguson, but all over this country. He's an Army general. He said it is a tragic mistake that when police are outfitted with tanks and weapons of war, they treat the populations they're supposed to police as the enemy. There is nothing that beats, he said, an officer on the ground.
What did you... I'm sorry.
Community walk, yes.
No, I'm sorry. No, I just wanted to bring in because I wanted. It's such a great issue. What was your thought about the national press and how it covered Ferguson? And we wrote some things about that when I'm for my work at Media Matters. But the idea that the national press seemed to instigate a lot of misinformation. There was stuff about what was going on. That Mr. Brown was, there was a lot of reporting on misreporting on how police had gone after him, and then again, obviously about how the national press tried to make it more of a racial issue in terms of instigating protest and instigating.
It is definitely a racial issue.
Right. No, I'm saying in a negative way, trying to perpetuate him as a suspect rather than as the victim.
Oh no, that's terrible. And obviously he can't speak for himself because he's dead.
Right.
He was gunned down by police officer Darren Wilson. That is, irrefutable. What is astounding in this whole situation is the recalcitrance of law enforcement, of the prosecutor. The prosecutor could have issued his own decision, an indictment or not an indictment, by himself without impaneling grand jury. And the cry from the community was a special prosecutor, that Bob McCullough, the longtime prosecutor in Ferguson, was too close to the police. His father was an officer who actually was killed by an African-American man. His family members are police. That his history precluded him from being able to be objective in this case, and instead he impaneled a grand jury, and it has gone on for months, and the anger and frustration in the community is palpable every day. And it goes to long-time injustice. You have an overwhelmingly African-American community, 68% black community, that is ruled by a white city council, a white school board, a white police force, 53 officers, 50 of them are white. And this police force now armed to the teeth. This is not about bringing peace to a community, and I think it's very much why Leslie McSpadden and Michael Brown Sr., Mike Brown's parents, are in Geneva right now testifying before the UN Rights Council. But this is one issue that is emblematic of problems we have throughout the country. It's the war at home, and we have to look at the war abroad, these endless wars from Iraq to Afghanistan. And then we have the issue of climate change, something Democracy Now! Has covered on a regular basis.
Yes, which is still, unfortunately, not given the respect as a valid issue. But it seems like that's starting to come around somewhat, or what's your take as far as climate change and the reality that people don't give it?
We need a media that's not brought to us by the oil, the gas, the coal companies, the nuclear companies when we cover climate change. We need a media that's not brought to us by the weapons manufacturers when we cover war and peace. We need a media that is independent, and that's why we founded Democracy Now!, is to bring people information that isn't brought to you by these vested interests. I mean, on the issue of climate change, there's an international global consensus. We have been at the UN climate summits starting in 2009 in Copenhagen, the next year in Cancun, then in Durban, then in Doha, then last year in Warsaw, Poland. We're going in a week to Lima, Peru for the UN climate summit, and next year the binding summit in Paris. Now, you might say, why waste the fuel? What happens there? Why not just stay home? Well, the thousands of people who gather from the frontline states most affected by climate change, and the young people, it is such a sophisticated movement all over the world, people deeply committed. In the United States, though, because of the billions that are poured into what many call stink tanks instead of think tanks, right, obfuscating the issue, leading them, among them is the Koch brothers, for example, the oil barons.
Done a lot of research on them, yes.
Yeah, so very, very important to address what are the facts here? I mean, in the United States, there's this global consensus, scientific consensus, but in the United States, you raise the issue of climate change. It is like we're going back to every time we refer to the Earth being round, we need to have on someone from the Flat Earth Society.
Yes.
It is that backward. The debate isn't whether human-induced climate change exists. That has been long established. Mm-hmm. The debate is what to do about it. And there you can have valid, very vigorous, rigorous debates about, how do we deal with this? And in Democracy Now!, we bring you the voices of people all over the world who are working on these issues. Whether we're talking about racial justice, whether we're talking about war, the global inequality, and the increased inequality between rich and poor in this country, or climate change, I really do think that those who are concerned about these issues are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back, and why I'm so looking forward to coming to Maplewood tonight.
What do you think is, and again, that's the title and the emphasis of your latest book. What do you think is the cause of that? Is it just corporate overtake, or is it people who are so busy they'll just grab whatever news and media they can get their hands on and don't want to look further?
I think people are very compassionate.
Yeah.
I think people care, but it's a matter of getting accurate information. I mean, how often when the U.S. goes to war, which sadly is so often, you have the media circling the wagons around the White House when that's not what we're supposed to do. I mean, we're not supposed to be a party to the parties. We're supposed to be apart from the parties. We are supposed to, my brother David and I also wrote a book called Static. The first was Accept the Rulers, and that's what we're supposed to be, the exception to the rulers. The second was called Static because that's what the media should be providing. Static, the dictionary definition of static, criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. We need a media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history.
And do you think it's interesting that we have such a technological explosion now? There's so many more avenues for news and information, but there is also so much more corporate concentrated oversight. What do you think is the answer for the average person, or for reporters who maybe work at big outlets and are not given the opportunity to dig into these? Is it the reporters? I always talk about it's not so much reporters are biased, it's more I think that they're lazy and greedy. The news outlets are greedy and go for the easiest buck or the buck that helps them. What is it when we have so much opportunity and technology available to get the word out through the web and other medium, but there's so much less independence?
Well, we know that that many newspapers have gone under, and it's often blamed on, the competition that there is. The Internet has really changed the face of journalism. I don't think it's just that. I mean, I think that the newspapers have been the gatekeepers of information for so long, and they so often express the opinions of a small minority elite. I don't mean people of color, I mean a power elite, which is very much a minority.
Sure.
And now people have other ways to get information, and that's important. By the way, Joe, I think it's also really important that we protect network neutrality, that we ensure the...
Yes, and that's the newest thing in the news, the net neutrality proposals that will open things up, absolutely.
Right, and interestingly, President Obama came out very forcefully this week. It's like the midterm elections have made him see the light in so many ways. But on net neutrality, came out and said we must preserve a free and open Internet. Well, his very own selection as the chair of the FCC is Tom Wheeler, and that's very interesting because Michael Powell, who's the former head of the FCC, is now the president. Michael Powell is the son of Colin Powell, by the way, the former secretary.
Oh, yes.
Michael Powell, who is the head of the FCC for years, is now the president of the NCTA, the National Cable and Telecommunications Association.
That's an interesting jump from a public office to a private mouthpiece, yes.
So it is the industry's largest lobbying group. Well, Tom Wheeler, who is now the head of the FCC, appointed by President Obama, is the former president of the industry's largest lobbying group, the NCTA. So they've switched positions. But I think Wheeler continues to act as if he is the head of the lobbying group with that same mentality. He is putting forward a so-called hybrid idea of net neutrality, and there are many who are saying no, that you are simply trying to allow corporations to privatize the Internet. And this is an enormous threat. The Internet was developed, in the public realm with public funds, with taxpayer money, and now that it is so incredibly lucrative, corporations cannot privatize it. It is a public commons and must be regulated like a public utility. You don't get to say if you're poor, you should have poorer phone service than someone else who has a lot of money. No, we say it's a public utility, and everyone gets it equally. In the same way, the Internet must be treated in that same way. It is the way. Corporations have been globalizing for years. It is the way the grassroots globalizes and communicates with each other all over the world. And that's absolutely of critical importance. We also have to, and one of the things I'll be talking about tonight at Columbia High School in Maplewood is the whole question of how we want to be in the world. I'm heading to Berlin this weekend to talk about this as well. The national surveillance state. Is that what we want to represent? Talking about the nomads of the digital age, the Edward Snowdens, the Chelsea Mannings, the people who have risked their freedom to open a discussion in this country about surveillance, about monitoring, about what freedom really is. These are the issues I'm going to address tonight.
Now, let me just remind people we're talking to Amy Goodman. She's the host and executive producer of Democracy Now! You'll be at Columbia High School tonight, as you mentioned, for the South Orange Maplewood Adult School program. Your background, you were born in Washington. You were raised in New York. I went to Radcliffe College. How did you get into this world from your background? Tell us a little about your background and how you got into news.
I feel like I've been a reporter since I was a kid. I saw journalism as the way to deal with social justice issues. In high school, our newspaper was the Maroon Echo, and local public high school in Bayshore, Long Island. And then in college, we revived a feminist newspaper called Seventh Sister. And from college, I started listening to WBAI in New York,
sure.
89.5 FM. I was turning my thesis into a series of articles for the multinational Monitor. Ralph Nader and Ellen Nairn started that publication. And it was called The Case Against Depo-Provera, the issue that I did. And from that point, I heard WBAI. I didn't grow up on it, but I heard it when I came back from college. And I thought, oh, my God, that is what I was so drawn to. And I went over to WBAI, and I really never left. I was news editor of the WBAI Evening News for years, and then I started doing Wake Up Call with Bernard White at WBAI, the morning show. And then I was asked by Pacifica to host this program called Democracy Now! And we started the program in 1996, thought it would just be an election show. That was the second election of President Clinton. I thought it would close the day after the elections, but there was more demand for it after than before, and it has just grown by leaps and bounds. And being on 1,300 stations around the world and translated into Spanish as well at democracynow.org. You can listen to the headlines there in Spanish, and the whole broadcast is there. It has just been an enormous privilege and opportunity to provide a forum for people to speak for themselves. Last week I was in Norway. They broadcast it throughout on television and radio in Norway. I was addressing the Norwegian Social Forum. This weekend I'll be in Berlin. Democracy Now! Broadcasts throughout Germany, in Japan, and South Africa. Throughout Latin America, we'll be in Peru for the summit, the UN summit. It is just so critical that there be a global forum that is not, that is corporate-free in the style of Pacifica, on television, radio, and the Internet, that allows us to have a discussion. I'll just end with this. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day: war and peace, life and death, and anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country. They can't have these debates on military bases. They rely on us in civilian society to have the discussions that lead to the decisions about whether they live or die, whether they're sent to kill or be killed. Anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society.
And so you'd gone right to WBAI out of college?
Yeah.
Or soon after. So that was basically you grew up journalistically in this realm. Why did you not want to go to a more mainstream or routine news outlets? I'm so glad you did not, but I'm just curious at that age.
I also write a column for King Features, Hearst Publications.
Yes, which many people should know about as well.
Yeah, with my colleague Dennis Moynihan, and I just finished this week's column. It's on the remarkable Iraq War veteran named Thomas Young, who died this past weekend, a young man who was wounded, critically wounded in Iraq the fifth day he was there, April 4th, 2004, 40404. The same day Casey Sheehan, Cindy Sheehan's son, was
absolutely.
both in Sadr City. And he came back. He was on the board of Iraq Veterans Against the War, and he has suffered terrible pain as a paraplegic for more than a decade. But he gave so much hope to so many people, and he died this past weekend in Seattle, where he had just moved. But I found at the beginning of my career what journalists look for their whole lives, their whole professional lives. I found independence, and that is critical for a journalist. So it is a great honor, and the audience of Democracy Now!, between the listeners on radio, the viewers on television, and those on the web, millions of people every month, is larger than a program on CNN or MSNBC. And I hope it is a model for people all over the world, bringing out the voices of people at the grassroots to debate and discuss these critical issues. It's been an enormous privilege, and I look forward to many more years doing this with my media heroes, the people I work with, like Juan Gonzalez, who I have co-hosted Democracy Now! With for all of the 19 years we've done Democracy Now! And Jeremy Scahill was a producer at Democracy Now!, how he started his journalism career, went on to, write Blackwater and as well Dirty Wars, which was Oscar-nominated. Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, our senior producer, who went back home to Egypt, where he continues to cover the Egyptian Revolution for us, covered Gaza, the Israeli assault on Gaza this summer, and so much more. I mean, the voices you hear on Democracy Now! Are so important because they are the authentic voices embedded in communities, and that's what you don't get in the corporate media.
Right, and I know that you're one of my heroes in the news business, because I know that when someone goes to Democracy Now!, and I usually listen and watch on the web while I'm working, and it's always insightful, but it is that independence. I think you can trust both independence and also your experience. So many people on the air now come in with very little news experience, very little research experience, in-depth reporting, digging out the facts, asking the hard questions, and you guys do that And you personally do that so well that I really hope, for all our sakes, that it can keep going, and it sounds like it will, just because the work you do is so necessary, and the approach is so clear and honest, and digging at the facts, which we really don't see that much of with people's agendas on a lot of other outlets.
Well, Joe, I think our job as journalists is to go to where the silence is. And so often, right there on the ground, it is not that silent. It is just that the corporate media does not bother to go there. And that's where most of us live.
Well, thank you again so much. Again, reminder, you will be at Columbia High School tonight, 7:30 p.m. It's part of the South Orange Maplewood Adult School program, Amy Goodman, and it's well worth your time to show up and listen to her and ask questions. And remember, Democracy Now! Is at democracynow.org. Get all the information on when you can watch, listen, read. The books are out there, and the word is always well-informed and appreciated.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. And yep, I'll be signing books afterwards, The Silence Majority, and then we race off to the airport, fly off to do the broadcast in London the next day. So I hope people do tune in, or actually do more than tune in. Come on out to Columbia High School in Maplewood tonight.
Thank you again, Amy, very much, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.